So this second part of JavaScript is actually fairly short. This is week 3. Here we will be worrying about just one aspect of JavaScript, importing and exporting modules. So to begin with, why modules and what are they anyway? So modules are things like libraries in other programming languages that you can import. They break down one huge monolithic program into smaller chunks so that you can deal with the program in a more efficient fashion. This facility is used for many reasons. One of them is that a large software project might involve many different people, so they cannot all work on the same piece of code all the time. So you break it up into smaller manageable chunks and give it to different people to work on. And if the interfaces between these two or these different chunks are cleanly defined, the APIs as it were, the application programming interface, if they are clearly defined, then it becomes easy enough for people to work as a team to achieve the same overarching goal. This typically is done very nicely in object-oriented world, because the object-oriented methodology lends itself very well to this way of separation of concerns, division of labor, etc. That's the reason why all major programs such as Chrome, Microsoft Office, anything that you look at really, even most likely things like Node.js, they're all written in object-oriented methodology. So the benefits of using modules, of course, is reusability. So one module is written, if it is perfected, you don't have to worry about it, and you can reuse it in different applications. For instance, if you have written a very good server that can handle any kind of serving on HTTP, then you don't worry about that. You make it in a module and then give it to people to use, and they don't worry about the internals either. And one such package is actually Express, quite nicely written for web application development. Readability also is improved, because when you read the big piece of code, you don't actually go into the nitty-gritty of how each step is implemented. You just look at the higher level, and then if you need to, you can drill down and get into the details. That's the way it is done. And maintainability, etc. And then there are technical things like scope pollution that is avoided. Encapsulation basically is an idea that the functionality that you promise to the world will be exposed through a predefined contract, a predefined API. So you can maintain that API constant while changing the internals. That means you have the freedom of improving your code that is encapsulated, that is separate from the rest of the world. You can implement it differently. It's just that the interface that you have defined, that you have promised to the external world through a published API, will have to be respected. That is your binding contract with the rest of the world. So this is the main idea of modules, and it's such a foundational thing in software development that people take it for granted that you know this. You will, by the time you reach your next year or the year after that, you will completely be familiar with this kind of idea. Even later in this course, you will see that you're using modules not written by yourself, but that are already there as packages. So in JavaScript, there are two different systems by which you can use modules. One is called ES modules, ESM, and the other one is CommonJS. They have slightly different syntax and keywords, etc. In Node.js, we will be using only CommonJS. So going through the ES modules syntax might actually be counterproductive, because some of you might actually end up trying to use ES module keywords in CommonJS, and the mixing will not work. And for that reason, we will go through only the CommonJS. Even though these things are there, it turns out that CommonJS, which is used in Node.js, is actually a bit of a hack. So people implemented it as quite nicely done hack, but a hack nonetheless. ES module, on the other hand, they are actually a more modern version of CommonJS. It's actually a language feature. So it's not something that is built on top of the language using functions as it is done in CommonJS, but it's actually a language feature. So for that reason, it actually works quite a bit better. But Node.js uses CommonJS, and we will be using CommonJS in this course. But when you reach WAD2, where you'll be working with the front end, remember, now we are dealing with only the back-end programming. When you deal with the front end, you will actually start using ESM, and you will realize that it might turn out to be better. So the comparison between ESM and CommonJS is actually a bit academic at this point, because we are not going to use ESM. So let's skip over that one and look at CommonJS. So if you have a function in CommonJS that you define, let's say in a file that you expect to be using as a module, all you have to do is to assign whatever it is that you want to export as an object, which means you have to put it in braces, and assign it to module.exports. The S there is important. What it means is that there is an object called module that is given to you. You don't define it. It's already there when you are running Node.js, and that object has a property, predefined property, exports. So the moment you put something there, an object, hopefully, the moment you put something there, that can be accessed from some other file. How do you access it? The keyword to use that is require. So you keep your functions in, say, maths.js, and all you have to do is to say require maths.js. You have to do this dot slash if the file is in the current folder. If it is in some other folder, you have to actually do the right path. In other words, you have to actually give the complete path, either relative or absolute, because if you don't do that, then Node.js will assume that you're looking for some standard packages, and it will try to load it from standard locations, and your module obviously will not be there. Now, when you say require something, require this file for instance, what is it that you're getting? What you're getting is whatever you put in here. What you put in there is an object, so that object will come back to you, and this syntax here, const an object looking thing, that is called object destructuring. You're actually peeking inside the object, you're unpacking the object, that comes back to you, and pulling out the element inside, which is add, that is a property that is inside, and that is coming here. So it is for this reason that we looked at how to create objects on the fly in the last video. So that's the introduction to CommonJS. So ignore ESM for now. So ESM, so let's ignore this slide. ESM, no need to go through that. ESM, die. Let's go to CommonJS. So if you want to export a bunch of things, what you will do is to define all those things in your module file with using, say, utils.js, a utility module. You're defining that. Then you're defining a function, add, and a constant pi. And all you have to do, as I said, is to put in the predefined object module, assign a property exports on the fly, an object that you create like this. When you say add here, add is actually something that is known in the current scope. So what this guy does is to create a property called add in this object that you're creating, and the value of that is whatever you put here, whatever the value of that object is in the current scope. Here it happens to be a function object, so it is as though you have actually written function, the whole body of function right here. Pi is a constant, so it's as though you have written this 3.14, so it's that. So that's how you do this. And when you want to use it, say in your main.js, you destructure, unpack the object that you packed here. This is packing of an object. You unpack it by using the object syntax on the left hand side. On the right hand side, it's actually packing. On the left hand side, you're unpacking it. You just say require, that just gives you that object, and then you just unpack it. After that, you have add and pi in the current scope. You can just use them. Add is a function, so you can add a couple of things, and you just get this function. Pi is a constant that you defined here, that is available to you in main.js. That's all. There's nothing complicated here. Now, if you want to export a single value, so a single function, say function called log is the function name, and then you can actually say module.exports is that function. So as you know, function itself is a function object, so that can be exported like that. And in app.js, you just say log, const log, require this. Remember, when you say require, all you're doing is just getting whatever has been put into that module.export. So you keep just getting that. So const log require means const log is defined to be that function that you have defined there. It just becomes that function, and then you have access to that function. That's the way to look at it. So if you have multiple things defined in, say, utils.js, notice that you're not specifying .js there, but the location is specified. Then you can destructure the object that you put in module.exports, and then you get whatever you destructured, meaning whatever you picked inside the object and picked out. At the same time, you have this facility of renaming on the fly what you have in the object. For instance, suppose you have add, which you did in utils.js. You have add as a function here, and you want to call it by some other name. So you start with destructuring it, and you give this operator and give the new name. So the original name that is already there in module.exports first, and then the new name that you want to call it. So add will be renamed to sum in this scope. So sum can be used. Of course, add will not be there. So if you try to do add, then that will give you an error. Now, if you want to import the whole object that has been exported by module.exports, you can just say utils require.utils. So in this file, whatever you exported, which actually was an object containing add and py, and you're saying that it is utils, and that becomes an object in the current scope with a method add and a property py, because that's what you defined them to be in utils. Just to refresh your memory, let's go back. So that's your utils.js. You had add and you had py, and then you combine them on the fly into an object, pack them into an object, and that's what this guy is. When you say require utils, and that object is exactly what you get. And that object has a method. It's not a property because it's a function. We call it a method. Of course, you have to say utils.add because add is not there in the current scope, but utils as an object is there, which contains a method add. And if you want to say utils.py, that would be a property of utils object, and that you can actually access also. Similarly, you can export just one function that you saw. So here is an exercise for you to play with. Please do this, even if you think it is very simple. Just try to do this so that you get used to it. The syntax is actually, if not complex, easy to forget. Then you can have something like a default like single export that also you have to play with and learn. My way of remembering this is notice that module.exports is the object that you will get when you say require, and that being an object, you can attach other properties to it, and all those things will come back to you when you say require that file, and you can access them just the way you see it here. And you can even unpack them on the fly. So if you say const log require logger, then what you're getting is whatever you put in there. What you put in there is log plus a property one. So you get those two things in log. And if you want one, the function one, you can say, you can unpack whatever is coming back to you and then look at only that property. So export's got a property one. So you just unpack that, destructure that object to get one. But of course, you already said log is this guy. So you can actually, instead of saying require dot logger here, you could just say log because you already have that object in the current scope. That also will work. You can check this out. This will actually work. So once you understand that what is coming back to you is the object that you placed here, then everything becomes a lot more intuitive. And also when you realize that a function in JavaScript is actually an object which has a function part to it, and then you can attach multiple properties to it. The last thing we want to do is to try to alias the whole module import. So you create an object on the fly, put a few things inside, those are all functions, and put that object into exports. And when you import that by requiring this file, you will get all those guys. And on the fly, you can rename it. Area circle becomes circle area, whatever you want. And that thing you can do. Also, you can actually rename or use an alias to import the whole object that has been exported, and then you can use shapes.area circle, etc. in there. So play with it and understand all these things. Practice this multiple times so that it's very clear to you. Now, in this course, most likely you may not be creating too many modules of your own, but you will be using a lot. So starting next week, you will be using standard packages. They are all modules. The fact that what is coming back to you is an object, and then you can access different members of that object, different properties or methods of that object. You have to keep that in mind. And if you want to alias something, you want to call it by a different name, all those things you have to understand. Now, the last exercise here is to illustrate to you that you have the facility of importing multiple things, obviously, require multiple modules, one after another. And depending on what you call them, how you destructure the objects coming from the required files, you can play with it and you can do various things with it. Okay, so that's all there is to today's lesson. Like I said, this is actually a fairly short short one, importing and exporting. Exporting, remember, you just have to say module.exports in your file and equate that to an object. That object typically is composed, created on the fly by using braces, and you put the functions that you define inside. So the property of that object for each name will be the name of the function, and the value will be the function object that you have defined inside that file. And when you require that file, the module that you've created, what's coming back to you is whatever you placed inside module.exports. Typically is an object, and you can actually deconstruct it, rather destructure it, and use it in your main program or the program in which you're actually importing it. You can also destructure it and rename the properties on the fly, and keep in mind that you can require multiple modules. That is something that you will do starting next week. So all the best to you in your lab test, and Happy New Year. Sing Nian Kuai Lu.